And welcome to the 30th meeting of the Rural Affairs and Islands Committee in 2025. Before we begin, can I remind everyone to switch their electronic devices to silent. Our first item on the agenda is to decide whether to consider the evidence taken as part of the scrutiny of the Greyhound Racing Offences Scotland Bill in private and at future meetings, and to consider draft reports on the Greyhound Racing Offences Scotland Bill in private at future meetings. Are we all agreed? Thank you. Our next item on the agenda is an evidence session with the Scottish Land Court on the Crofting and Scottish Land Court Bill. And I welcome to the meeting Alison Irvine, the Principal Clerk from the Scottish Land Court and the Lands Tribunal for Scotland. Good morning. Can I just say, you'll not have to operate your mic. A gentleman here will do that for you. We don't anticipate the session taking very long, but we've allocated 30 minutes. I think we'll also note that the Scottish Land Court can't comment on policy decisions, but hopefully this morning we can discuss some of the operational impacts that Part 2 of the bill could potentially have. So on that basis, my first question to you is, what are the main operational benefits, but also the risks of merging the Scottish Land Court and the Land Tribunal for Scotland? On the basis that in the submission to the committee, Lord Duthie highlighted some operational implications of the bill as currently worded. Do you have any additional comments?
The administrative team, which I lead, has gradually been merged over the past 4 years. So we have found that to be very beneficial. The biggest benefit is the fact that 2 very small teams have become 1 slightly bigger team, and that gives us much more flexibility. And I'm not legally qualified, but I see that being very much a benefit for the members as well. It would mean that they can, without special provisions being made, change jurisdictions within our business. So in the past, it has been possible for a legally qualified member of the Lands Tribunal to take a case in the Land Court when none of the Land Court members could do it. However, we had to come to the Scottish Government and get that person specially appointed, which is a lot of extra time and energy for no particular benefit. So I think there's a lot of benefits there just in being more efficiently organised and being better able to cover for people. You asked about risks as well. I'm not sure that I can see any risks. I suppose the biggest one would be that the Lands Tribunal would not have its own separate identity, and some people might be attached to that. But in practical terms, I can't see any difference because, as I say, administratively, we now manage the 2 together. We do have separate systems because they are 2 separate bodies. So again, administratively and organisationally, it would be helpful just to be 1 body.
So at the moment, do the 2 bodies sometimes is there a sense of overlap in expertise or a synergy between the teams that ultimately legally bring them together? That's going to bring benefits.
I think so, yes. There are various provisions, and I don't know if any of you are responsible for the Land Reform Bill, but you will have seen in that, if you are, that there are various provisions where the Lands Tribunal are particularly referred to, or the Land Court is particularly referred to, and at times they can then hand over to the other body if they need to. So there's definitely some overlap. It would also be a broadening of the range of things that we do, and I think the public would have a better understanding because we do find that they just see the word land and assume that everything comes to us, which will still not be the case, but it would certainly reduce that issue.
So even in terms of the public understanding of what roles the 2 bodies have, there's some grey areas about, within the public's mind, who should deal with it, but that will be taken away because ultimately there'll be,
I think so, yes,
not quite a one-stop shop, but a far clearer understanding of what the responsibilities and the roles are.
Yeah, there will still be things that go to the ordinary courts, the Sheriff Court or the Court of Session, but where it's a specialist court, it will just be 1. You don't have to decide whether it's the Tribunal or the Land Court.
Okay, thank you. Alistair Allen.
Thank you. Picking up on some of those themes, I suppose, again, I realise there's a limit to maybe what you can comment on, but in terms of the administrative impact, Lord Duthie has commented, the chair of the Land Court has commented about the system for appeals under the new arrangements. I wonder if you could say anything about that. He's mentioned that the bill would have result, other than in cases where the presiding legal member is the chair, decisions in land registration, title conditions, electronic communications code and disputed compensation cases would always be subject to internal appeal. This is a significant innovation on the status quo. So is there anything you can say about how you feel that would work, how that would impact on the workload of the court, how that would be managed?
So the Lands Tribunal has more work coming in than the Land Court, and the bulk of their cases are those types of cases that have been listed there. And I'm not suggesting that every case goes to appeal, but clearly if they then had to deal with internal appeals on some of those cases, that would definitely increase our workload. We also would have to schedule, we would have to find time for 3 of the members, not just 1, because internal appeals are heard by the chair plus 2 other members, and it has to be 2 people that haven't been involved in the case. So that seriously restricts how many people would qualify. And again, it might mean looking for people from outside the normal membership of the current team. In the Land Court, which is the only experience that we have at the moment, there are 4, sometimes 5 members, and if most of them are disqualified because they've already had some involvement in the case, we have to go to retired members. So that is quite difficult as well. But it would also be the practical impact on the scheduling, the time, the fact that those people are not available for other cases, and all of the knock-on effects, I think.
Okay, thank you.
Lord Duthie also highlighted that there's been no Gaelic applications in the last 10 years, and that could potentially restrict the pool of candidates for an appointment. Do you think that needs to be, is that out of date now? Does it need to be updated to ensure that there isn't a restriction on the pool of potential candidates?
I'm going to be careful what I say here because I am only operational.
Yes.
Clearly, as soon as you put more qualifications in, you make it more difficult for people to apply. So yes, I'm sure it will have an impact. I would also say anyway, from a purely practical point of view, and I believe Lord Duthie mentioned this, it would be very difficult to just have a Gaelic speaker. You would still need to employ an interpreter as you would for any other person with a different language need. So in the interests of open justice, I think we would want to be seen to make sure that everybody could understand what was going on, because my personal opinion is that you open up the door to it being a conversation between one Gaelic-speaking member and one applicant, and nobody else in the room understands what's happening.
Yeah. I guess the requirement for a member to have Gaelic isn't necessarily the most important thing. The most important thing is there's access to Gaelics within the operational concerns, and that's something that could be brought forward as an amendment.
Looking at it purely operationally, I don't want to stray into policy, but purely operationally, the important thing is making sure that everybody is clear as to what is happening. So it would be, as we do with Polish speakers, for example, we have in the court service provisions to get translations.
Okay, thank you. Alistair?
The restriction that you're describing, although just for the record, it is possible for people to learn languages, including Gaelic.
Yeah.
Ariana?
So this might stray away from operational, but when I was understanding that need for someone, a Gaelic speaker, I wondered if it was really more about somebody who's connected to, it's more about a cultural piece and people's relationship to the Gaeltacht and Dúchas and that. So it's not just the language, it's the culture. So I just was wondering about that, but that might stray beyond what you can comment on.
I think it probably does. I understand what you're saying, and certainly it's helpful. But again, I think the the court has to apply the legislation. So it would be a case of whether everybody understood what the court was doing. Right. And I think that's about the language as much as anything else.
Thank you. Beatrice Wishart.
Thanks, Convener. Good morning. There were some concerns raised in evidence that the merger is a cost-cutting exercise, but you've already indicated that the two have gradually merged over the last 4 years. I wonder if you're able to provide any reassurance that the efficiency of the expanded court won't be compromised by the merger.
As the lead for the team, I certainly would not want to see it compromised. We started merging the administrative support 4 years ago because it was a very small team that supported the Lands Tribunal. There were only 3 of them, and 2 of those 3 retired that year. So it was purely a functional decision, and we have brought all of the tools and resources that they need. It would be much easier for us now to have a merged support system, which we don't yet have because we're not merged at the top. But it's not about cutting costs, and it's not about cutting staff. We have the same, in fact, we have more bodies, but a slightly different organisation.
Okay, thank you.
Lynn Tweed.
Convener, and good morning, Alison. Thanks for your answers so far. In your opinion, would tribunal members sitting in the new court retain the same decision-making powers and independence as before?
Again, I can only answer from the operational side. I can't see any reason why not. The court and the tribunal have actually been co-located for many years, and I believe you're aware that they have had the same chairman or president since about the 1970s, I think it is. So their leadership at the top has always been aware of what's happening in both bodies. I see no reason why that would change, but I think all of the members are independent-minded and would continue to function independently.
Okay, thank you.
Grant.
Can I ask about expertise? The court and the tribunal have different expertise in a lot of areas, and I guess the concern is maybe not in the here and now, but in the future, is there likely to be a loss of that expertise? Do you think kind of people taking a broader range of cases would mean that they would have a broader range of knowledge rather than in-depth knowledge on certain issues?
I think that the expanded court would still have a requirement for both agricultural members and surveyor members, so that level of expertise would presumably be retained. Again, that's a bit outside my sphere. Speaking administratively, there are some things across the 2 jurisdictions which are very similar, and there are definitely some areas which are very separate, and people can and still do specialise in those separate areas. But it does mean that we can cover if somebody goes off sick, for example, because if you have one specialist and they go off long-term sick, it's very difficult to replace that, whereas at least if you have other people who are prepared to cover for them, they can build up their expertise much more quickly if there has to be a sudden change. So I would have no concerns about that. I feel it gives us more flexibility and more opportunity to build up knowledge across the board that would help us.
Okay, thank you.
Tim Eagle.
Thank you very much and good morning. Just about in relation to appeal rights post-merger, how would you assure that parties have the equivalent rights to appeal as is currently happens now?
I think that would be a legislative provision.
Okay.
Simple question, simple answer.
Aggressive,
That's the way we like it. The next question might not be quite so straightforward. Ariane Burgess.
Thanks, Convener. So this is around the potential expansion of the Land Court's functions. So the Scottish Government stated that consideration will be given to the expanded Land Court taking on new functions in relation to our House cases in time to come. And I'd be interested in your thoughts on that idea of expansion and how that might impact the court.
So obviously, whether that happens is a policy question, and as the operational side, I would do whatever I was asked to do. Having said that, the court already has quite a number of jurisdictions that are fairly niche. So it is used to dealing with a range of different pieces of legislation, for example, and not necessarily having large volumes of the same type of case. So we're not set up to deal with just one type of case time and time again. We are set up to deal with a number of different areas.
So you could potentially take on our house-related cases?
I would have thought so, but that's purely from the operational side. And I would say that unless something was going to come with a large amount of extra work, in which case we'd have to look at the staffing to go with it, it shouldn't make a difference to how we operate.
Okay, thank you.
I suppose to follow on from that, an environmental court could potentially be a very busy, very big body. And there's been talk about this since Brexit, about whether there should be or shouldn't be an environmental court, and the government's policy position on that. So we're not going to go to the policy position, but it's almost within the legislation. The government may or they may not at some time in the future. At this point, when the legislation is going through and we're considering the legislation, would the development of an environmental court within the two bodies that are merging, according to the bill at the moment, would that not considerably impact on the operational capacity as you currently have? And would it not need quite a long lead-in time to develop the systems and the capacity to have what, in my view, would be not just an add-on, it would be a significantly heavier workload as an environmental court might bring?
I think, again, I can only give you my personal opinion based on the operational side, but we do already deal with appeals against some SEPA, Environmental Protection Agency, decisions. However, I'm sure you're right, if it was going to be a full-scale environmental court, then that's a very different thing, and I think there would have to be a lot of policy decisions made about that I can't comment on. But if it was going to bring a significant increase in the workload, then yes, there would definitely have to be questions asked about the resourcing and the technology that we use and all the rest of it. And I think that would be a large-scale exercise, and I would imagine that would take some time to put in place. Yeah.
But given this is even a topic we're touching on, has the Scottish Government consulted or effectively asked the Scottish Land Court and the Tribunal anything about taking on environmental court status, given how big a change it might be?
I'm honestly not aware of any official approaches, but that would probably be outside my remit, so it could have been done and I may not have known about it.
Okay, thank you. Well, I don't believe we've got any further questions. So, Alison, thank you very much for your evidence this morning. That's been really helpful. I'm now going to suspend the meeting for 5 minutes to allow for a changeover of witnesses. Thank you. Thank you very much. Good morning. The third item on the agenda is an evidence session with the Scottish Government as part of our consideration of the Greyhound Racing Offences Scotland Bill at Stage 1. And I welcome to the meeting Jim Fairley, the Minister for Agriculture and Connectivity. Also joining us from the Scottish Government we have Andrew Vose, the Veterinary Head of Animal Welfare, and Keith White, a lawyer. And I also welcome Mark Ruskell to the committee. We've allocated approximately 90 minutes for discussion. We've got quite a few questions to get through, so can I ask members and the Minister to be succinct in questions and answers. So I'm going to kick off. So we understand now that the Scottish Government is supporting the general principles of this bill, having previously told the committee in 2024 that it considered that an outright ban was not necessary, but there was a case for licensing. So what has changed, Minister?
Well, I did have an opening statement to give to the committee beforehand, but if you want to go straight to the questions, would you prefer to do that?
Well, no, I'm quite happy if you have an opening statement. Yes, that would be helpful.
Okay, thank you. So thank you, Convener, and thank the committee for inviting me to give evidence on the Greyhound Racing Offences Scotland Bill on behalf of the Scottish Government. When this bill was first brought forward as a proposal, the Government adopted a neutral position, and at that stage the proposal sought to prohibit all greyhound racing in Scotland. Now, given the breadth of that proposal and the fact that the details of precisely what would be prohibited were still being developed, it was entirely pragmatic for the Government to reserve its position until the final content of the bill was known. Additionally, as the committee will be aware, the Scottish Government was also considering the feasibility of introducing statutory licensing for greyhound racing and whether this could drive the animal welfare improvements that we all want to see. The bill now before the Scottish Parliament is narrower in scope in that it seeks specifically to prohibit the racing of greyhounds on oval tracks. The stated aim of the bill is to address the inherent welfare risks associated with running of dogs at speed on oval tracks, risks which, even with good practice, cannot be eliminated entirely, and risks that licensing could not eliminate. So, having carefully considered the evidence presented, the Scottish Government has agreed to support the principles of the bill, recognising that it represents a proportionate response to those risks. As I've already highlighted to the committee and to Mr Ruskell, we will seek to make some amendments to the bill. However, I look forward to working with the member on those amendments in the weeks ahead. While we support the principles of the bill, we are very mindful of the implications for the individuals and the communities connected with greyhound racing in Scotland, particularly those involved with the Thornton track in Fife. In recent years, the activity at Thornton has been on a small scale and largely informal. For many who have continued to run their dogs there, this has been less about serious competition and more about companionship, a chance to meet friends and others with a shared interest, to socialise and to give their dogs a run on the track. That said, I do of course recognise that the bill will not prevent greyhound owners from meeting and socialising with others to exercise their dogs freely in open spaces. But we must be cognisant of the social and community aspects of the bill and the bill's impact in this regard. Further, we recognise that the bill addresses legitimate welfare concerns and in the practice will effectively only a very small number of individuals and animals given the current minimal activity at Thornton while preventing oval tracks being set up for racing elsewhere in Scotland. I briefly want to comment on the concerns that have previously been raised regarding the rehoming of greyhounds given up as a consequence of the bill. For some time now, most owners attending Thornton have kept their greyhounds more as pets and not as competitive racing dogs. On that basis, we do not anticipate significant displacement, nor do we expect a major rehoming challenge to arise. And finally, I want to emphasise that the Government's position on this bill relates solely to the specific welfare concerns based on the evidence presented regarding racing greyhounds on oval tracks, and it should not be interpreted as indicating a wider position on other animal-related sports or activities, each of which has its own circumstances and regulatory framework. I hope that gives some clarity on the Government's reasoning and on the considered approach we have taken in reaching this position, and I'll be happy to take some questions from the committee.
Thank you, Minister. I'll just kind of give away my first question, but it still stands. What has actually changed? Back in 2024, you stated that the Government is not persuaded of the need to ban greyhound racing in Scotland, and that was on an oval track. And in particular, you were not convinced that such a ban was proportionate or indeed fair. and that was in response to animal welfare concerns. You said you were cautious against making assumptions about the current situation in Scotland and legislation to ban a sport without a sound evidence base for doing so. So what has changed in terms of a sound evidence base to suggest there are animal welfare concerns? Because once again, you did suggest that there was an inherent risk in everything that we do, and that was no different from for greyhound racing. And also you suggested that no complaints have been made to the SSPCA about the activities on Thornton and no enforcement action. So again, what evidence has changed to suggest that there is now an inherent animal welfare issue which gives the government its position to support the general principles?
At that time, when I was giving evidence previously, I hadn't had the meeting with Mr Ruskell or had the considerations about the specifics on the oval track itself. And it's that oval track, that's the bit that this bill is now focused on. It's the hitting I think this, the phrasing that Mr Ruskell has used when he's brought this forward is dogs hitting that first bend at 40 miles an hour. There is no way to take that risk out while racing has been done on those oval tracks, and that is the very specific point about the government now being prepared to support this bill.
So where's the evidence base for a sound evidence base?
The sound evidence base on hitting 40 mile an hour tracks. Well, Mr Ruskell has given evidence to this committee in the past, and it's that front shoulder, the front part of the dog as it's hitting that 40 mile an hour track. There is evidence to suggest that there are dangers to the dogs themselves. There's also dangers because of the speed they're going at, that they're losing their footing on that bend, and also as a result of that, that's creating collisions, and then they'll hit barriers. And as a result of all of these things, that puts an inherent risk on that particular part of the track.
Again, I'm not sure that getting evidence from the member that's introducing the bill is a sound evidence base. But you also commented on that Thornton was inherently different from GBGB tracks. Thornton's an oval track. Yes. GBGB are oval tracks. So, again, what has changed to suggest that you should now ban racing at Thornton?
Because the bill, as it was introduced at that time, was not about banning racing on oval tracks, it was about banning racing all over.
Yeah, but at that time you didn't suggest there was an issue at Thornton, and you're now suggesting there is.
Because it's an oval track.
Okay. You said you didn't believe the ban was proportionate. What in terms of proportionality has changed and that an all-out ban is now proportionate?
Because we're not banning racing on all circumstances. We're banning racing, or the bill would ban racing on an oval track.
Is there any evidence that any other kind of racing takes place in Scotland?
Not in Scotland.
No, so effectively that would be an all-out ban on greyhound racing?
Not unless somebody wants to set up a straight track.
Okay, thank you. I've got a question from Tim Eagle.
Good morning, Minister. Can you talk us through the consultation, evidence gathering and engagement the Scottish Government has undertaken over the past several years to develop your current position on the bill? And could you take account of the fact that I think Thornton Racetrack raised this concern that the only people that had replied to the consultation that had been done was animal activists, and how the Government have tried to make that as broad as possible?
Well, I'll let Andrew talk to the evidence gathering that's been done over a number of years, but I sat in this committee when we had Thornton Greyhound race owners here. I have myself spoken to a number of greyhound owners over the period of this piece. In fact, when I gave evidence and I cited the fact that I had spoken to a friend who had actually got rescue greyhound dogs, that attracted considerable response. But I'll let Andrew give you a flavour of the kind of consultation that's been done over the last number of years.
Yeah, so if we take the last few years, we've obviously considered the evidence that's been supplied to this committee in response to the petition. That's included the Scottish Animal Welfare Commission's research, and that report quoted various pieces of research to underline the fact that it's now it is widely accepted that there is this inherent risk of injury associated with running around bends. There's specific patterns of injuries to dogs concerning the left forearm and the right hind leg. So there are various studies that have been done in the UK and internationally, particularly in places like Australia and New Zealand, to back that up. So there is ample evidence to suggest there is this particular risk associated with running around bends. We've also obviously been monitoring the responses to this bill and the call for evidence. We've also been looking at the evidence that's been presented to the Welsh Senedd in their evidence sessions and the written submissions to them. We've also considered the latest published results from the Greyhound Board of Great Britain. As you know, I'm sure they produce annual reports of injuries and fatalities. So, for example, the latest 2024 season year, there were 3,800 injuries and 123 dogs were put to sleep on humane grounds at the track in England and Wales. They give a whole host of detail in their reports about how, a few examples here about how the number of dogs were they were put to sleep on vets' advice away from the track, sudden deaths, dogs designated unsuitable for holding. So these things are laid out in detail in the Greyhound Board of Great Britain reports, and that's also been part of our considerations.
And do you, I don't know if you want to twist your mic up slightly in case anybody can't hear, but so just to clarify that then, so you're satisfied, are you, that you have reached as wide a group as people as you can with the consultation that's been done either by the government or by the member in this? And just to go back to the convener's point there about the change, the government change as this bill is developed, you're satisfied that consultation pre and post that change have brought in all the evidence that we need to see?
Yeah, so I should say we also consulted on our licensing proposal a couple of years ago as well. So I think have considered a very wide range of evidence that has now informed our position suitably.
Okay, so Thornton Racetrack's concern that the only people that had really replied were animal activists, in your mind, is not fair because actually you think a broad range of people have responded to this.
Yes, and I think there have been clearly. Thornton have had the chance to respond, and there have been other voices from Greyhound Board of Great Britain have responded and put in detailed responses to this committee and to the Welsh Senedd. So we've obviously looked at those responses as well, and other sort of pro-racing groups have had the chance to put their view as well.
Okay. And this committee has taken evidence sessions widely. So the committee has had the ability to bring people in who were arguing to. In fact, I think I sat in one of the sessions where the GBGB board were here when I was still a backbencher. So this is not something that has been, flick of a switch. There's been a lot of considerations that gone into it.
Okay. That's fine.
Minister, what I specifically want to touch is what different evidence base has developed since you last said that your position was that you weren't in favour of banning because it was disproportionate. What has changed? I think Andrew Voss was saying that the only thing that's changed, because we had the Scottish Animal Welfare Report, at the time you decided not to support a ban, the only thing that's changed is the 2024 GBGB report. Is that right?
No. The bit that has changed is Mr Ruskell's position in the bill that it is to ban it on oval tracks. That's the primary bit.
No, but your position on whether oval tracks are dangerous.
My position is that it is the oval tracks that is where the ban will be implemented.
But the only additional evidence that has made you change your mind from evidence on oval tracks when you last appeared in front of the committee to now is the 2024 GBGB report. Is that correct?
No. It's the fact that it is being banned on oval tracks.
No, I'm not talking... So I need to make myself clear here.
I'm not sure how to make it any clearer, Convener. There has been wide-scale consultation. I sat in the committee listening to the evidence. The government took a neutral position when I was given the bill when I was made a minister. At that time, it was to ban racing in Scotland across the board. That has subsequently changed to banning it on oval tracks. And it is the oval tracks bit that is the specific bit that has allowed the government to support the principles.
I don't think anybody at any point discussed racing on anything other than oval tracks, because there wasn't at that time. So any of the evidence we had was surrounding oval tracks. Now, the Members' Bill specifically mentions oval tracks, but when you last were in front of the committee, there was no discussion around potentially racing on straight tracks. It was about the current situation in Thornton.
I dispute that.
So, Minister,
dispute that, because as a backbencher, I think I asked the question when I was a member. Yeah, would this be a problem if there were straight tracks? Now, the answer at that point, I think I recall, and if it'll be on the official record, I think I recall it being said that, well, yeah, but there is no straight tracks in Scotland, but it could be raced on straight tracks. And that's the specific bit that Mr Ruskell has changed in his bill. It's about going on oval tracks.
I need to be clearer on this then. At the time, you were not minded to ban racing at Thornton, which was on an oval track. You are now minded to ban that. On what basis? What further evidence has come forward that racing on an oval track is, since the last time you said it was okay, has changed? Because from what I understand, the evidence you had at that time for the Scottish Animal Welfare Commission was based on an oval track. So the only thing that's changed relating to evidence in oval tracks is the GBGB 2024 report. Is that correct? So focusing on oval tracks.
The timing of that, is the timing relevant in that position?
So effectively we've had no more evidence suggesting the inherent risk of racing on an oval track other than the GBGB 24 report.
No, I'm not. No, the only position the only thing that has allowed the government to come to the position is on the basis of the fact that Mr Ruskell has changed it from banning racing in its entirety to banning it on oval tracks.
Yeah, it doesn't make sense, Minister. When we were talking about banning greyhound racing at Thornton, an oval track, and you did not support that ban, you are now supporting the ban on oval racing at Thornton. That position has changed. Are we agreed?
Yes.
What has made you change that decision? On what evidence? What evidence has come forward since you decided the ban shouldn't be in place at Thornton to now when it should be?
Because the bill at that time was talking about banning racing of
No, we're not talking about the bill. It's your position on oval racing. So in 2024, you did not suggest there should be a ban on oval racing.
It wasn't my bill to bring forward in 2024 to say it was an oval racing. So let me be absolutely clear, Convener, because I see where you're trying to go with this. The position that Mr Ruskell's bill at that point was to ban racing. End of. There was no mention of oval tracks, and you're absolutely correct. There was no mention of oval tracks. Mr Ruskell has now changed the bill to say that he will ban racing on oval tracks, and we can support that based on the evidence that we have about the inherent risk of animal welfare issues because of those oval tracks, and that is the only thing that has changed.
But you had that evidence in 2024.
But that's not what the bill was asking us to do.
Forget about the bill.
But the bill is
Please, Minister, it's a simple question.
And I've given you a simple answer.
No, you haven't answered my question.
I think I have.
In 2024, you were not minded to ban racing at Thornton. Is that correct?
We were not minded to ban racing in Scotland. It wasn't about Thornton. It wasn't necessarily about Thornton on its own. It was about racing in Scotland. So therefore, Thornton was the track at that time, which is why I believe that Mr Ruskell has looked at it and said, how do we make sure that this ban can get the support? And his concern has always been, and I apologise if I'm putting words into the member's mouth, because the conversations that we have had with the member has been that that inherent risk on those bends is where the problem actually lies. So when he brought his bill forward to begin with, it was about banning greyhound racing. His bill did not mention oval tracks. So our position at that point was that we were not minded to ban racing across the board. The member has now changed his bill to say that he has brought it forward to ban it on oval tracks, which is where the inherent risk is, which has allowed the government to say we can accept and support that bill.
Sorry, Minister, I'm not going to let this lie. and I quote, "My understanding of what happens at Thorntons is that it's an entirely different beast from what is happening at the highly charged atmosphere of the tracks down south. In England, dogs are commodities rather than dogs in Scotland are much part of the family, they are for racing." At that point, you did not support a ban at Thornton, which was an oval track.
We didn't support
Minister.
We did not support a ban across Scotland.
So no, I'm talking specifically about the oval track at Thornton. You did not support the ban of racing on an oval track at Thornton. It's quite clear. That's what the record says. So on that basis...
But the bill wasn't about Thornton.
No, we're not talking about the bill. It's your opinion on oval racing.
So we are talking about the bill. I'm giving evidence on the bill that the member has brought forward. So yes, we are.
You're here to answer questions.
And I'm answering you the questions.
No, you're not.
Well, I think I am.
Your position has changed on oval racing.
My position has changed on oval racing, yes.
Right, OK, that's fine. On what basis has that changed? Because from what I can see, the only additional evidence on oval racing since your last position was not to ban it is the 2024 GBGB report.
Because Mr Ruskell's bill was
No. Let's focus on this. You have changed your position from not wanting to ban oval racing to want to ban it. All I want to know is on what evidence has changed for you to change your mind on that?
What has changed is that Mr Ruskell brought his bill forward with...
Sorry, Minister.
I don't know how to make this any clearer. The proportionality of banning racing across Scotland, as the bill stood right at the start, Convener, was that he was banning racing across Scotland on any track. What he has currently done is brought a bill forward where he is banning it on oval tracks, and it's the oval track where I am now convinced that there is enough inherent danger in those oval tracks to allow enough welfare concerns to be raised to say that that should no longer be allowed. I don't know how to make that any clearer.
Minister, I don't think you're being genuine here. In 2024, you did not think racing at Thornton should be banned. And that was on an oval track. You did not think it should be banned. You now believe it should be. All I am asking is, on what evidence, what has changed for you to change your view on banning oval racing at Thornton and not banning oval racing at Thornton?
Because the proportionality of the bill that Mr Ruskell brought forward at that time...
I'm sorry, Minister, you're not answering the question.
Well, I think...
What I'm trying to get to is actually the evidence would suggest in the GBGB report that actually injuries have reduced. They're at a record low. So if the evidence has made you change your mind, I don't understand that, because there's less evidence of injuries on tracks in 2024 than there was prior to 2024. Hopefully that's on the record, that you're refusing to answer a simple question, and that's disappointing, because all we want to do is find out what evidence has been brought forward to the government to change their position on banning racing on oval tracks. And we've not been able to do that.
Convener, is that the number of injuries has gone down. It has gone down very marginally, and there certainly hasn't been any reduction in the number of deaths based on the GBG information. This is the GBG
it's gone down, Minister.
It may have gone down marginally, but it's proportionality, Convener. And the oval track is the bit that is causing the issue for the welfare.
What's changed your mind from 2024?
Because Mr Ruskell's bill is now...
We're going to move on. I've got a question from Alistair Allen.
So I'm interested in asking about Thornton specifically, and my understanding is that...
I'm sorry, I'm struggling to hear you, Mr Allen.
Can you hear me now?
That's better, thank you.
Thank you, Convener. So I'm interested in asking about Thornton specifically. Am I right in thinking that Thornton is not currently operating?
It's not operating race days as I understand it at this moment in time.
So is there currently any activity which would be banned as a result of this bill, or is this problem essentially in the past tense?
There is no... I'm not sure when the last time they had an official race at Thornton, so I can't answer that unless Andrew has more information than I do.
No, we're not aware of any racing at Thornton for several months for most of this year. There doesn't seem to be any racing at Thornton.
Okay, does that, I mean, could that arguably be said to create a simpler situation in that we're really now dealing, it would appear, with preventing something happening in the future rather than preventing something that is currently underway?
Potentially, yes.
Would it be fair to describe in that case this is a situation which has possibly solved itself, notwithstanding the need for legislation for the future, but this problem has, this issue, if it is a problem, which I think many people out there would consider it is, has essentially come to an end?
Well, I don't have the figures in front of me, but what I do know is that there has been less and less interest in greyhound racing in Scotland. It has definitely been a diminishing sport. Excuse me. But this legislation will ensure that one of the issues that Mr Ruskell brought to us was the fact that a GBGB track could open up, and therefore the ability to have a prohibition on oval tracks would be the proportionate line to take at this moment in time.
So that would probably be the focus in the future, would be preventing commercial activity, since it would appear that this type of non-commercial activity is pretty much at an end.
Well, the bill is more about welfare, so I don't know that the commerciality is the issue with the bill.
Okay.
It's about the inherent risk on those bends,
okay,
where the collisions are more likely to take place.
Okay, thank you, Convener.
Thank you. Question from Evelyn Tweed.
Thanks, Convener, and good morning, Minister and officials, and thanks for your answers so far. The bill looks to criminalise both the track owner and the individual racing their greyhounds on a racetrack, but this is different from the Welsh bill, which would only criminalise those operating a greyhound racing venue or actively organising greyhound racing. What are your reasons for supporting criminalising both the track owner and individuals racing their greyhounds? And what do you think the consequences of this difference might be?
Well, the bill was prepared by the non-government bills unit for Mr Ruskell, so we didn't have any say in the drafting of that bill. But we do understand that there will need to have a suitable disincentive to ensure that there are try to avoid any unintended loopholes, and the narrow approach to only to penalise track owners was taken. If it was only the track owner that was penalised. So, as I say, it's Mr Ruskell's bill, and it was his bill team that drafted it in the way that it was.
Do you think there will be any consequences to the difference with the Welsh legislation?
Consequences in what sense?
In terms of unintended consequences?
Unintended consequences from a legal perspective, Keith?
Not really. I mean, the bill is aimed at the protection of the welfare of greyhounds, and so I can see why it's an acceptable approach to both the people who are responsible for the greyhounds to be responsible for not running them on an oval track, and also to prohibit people from setting up oval tracks where greyhounds can be run.
Okay.
Emma Roddick.
Convener, Minister, you said there obviously this is a non-governmental bill and you didn't have the opportunity to feed into these specifics. Is this section of the bill one that you would be looking to potentially amend at later stages, and if so, how?
We will be looking to work with the member to bring in several amendments. Where are we? Sections 3 to 9. If you give me a second, have you got that there, Keith? The sections that we're looking to make the amendments on. Yeah, sections 3 to 9. There are potential amendments there. The schedule of the bill, there are amendments, but these are in their early stages of discussion with the member.
What would the policy purpose be?
The policy purpose would be to bring the bill into line with the 2006 Act, as opposed to how it's been modelled at the moment, which is the Hunting with Dogs Act, and there will be a there are various things that we would need to discuss with the member before we bring those amendments forward. But there are various amendments that we are looking to discuss with the member.
Looking at these two offences, last time you gave evidence on this bill in its early stages, there was discussion around dogs from Scotland being raced in England. Do you see that that would be, there'd be an opportunity within the bill as drafted or through the amendments that you hope to take forward to be able to do something about that behaviour if it is spotted?
Do you mean to stop dogs going south to race?
Perhaps the owners organising to take them to a track in England?
I would imagine well, I don't imagine the owners are bound by the same legislation in terms of their moving of animals. That's the transport authorisations. So they would have to comply with the transport authorisations. But I don't anticipate us bringing anything forward that would prohibit the transportation of these animals.
Okay.
Just, I want to go back. Why is it that you support both criminalising track owners and individuals racing dogs, unlike the Welsh Bill? Why are you supporting that?
It's to bring the seriousness of the aspects of the animal welfare side of things, that it's not in anybody's interest to break the law. That it's not just one side or the other that would be caught out. Both the racer and the racetrack owner would be in breach, so therefore they could both be liable.
Okay, thank you. Alistair Allen.
Thank you. Picking up on the same point, I suppose interested just to know a wee bit about the government's attitude towards any potential amendment when it comes to the issue of criminal penalties. You mentioned that the penalty should apply both to the racetrack operator and the dog owner, but the bill talks about imprisonment potentially for up to 5 years, which would be the kind of sentence somebody would serve for an assault, a serious injury on a person. So is that an area of the bill that the government's given consideration to in terms of what the penalties should be?
Well, I think we'll be looking at the penalties will be in line with the Animal Welfare in Scotland, Animal Health and Welfare Scotland Act 2006, and that's the maximum penalties that are available within that Act. So rather than having a bespoke system specifically for greyhounds, it's probably better to tie it into the 2006 Act. That doesn't mean to say that it's a given that the maximum penalty would be given out. That wouldn't be for the government to decide. That would be for the judiciary, who were seeing a case that was in front of them.
Okay, thank you, Convener.
Thank you. Questions on the definition of a racetrack from Emma Harper.
Thanks, Convener. Good morning, Minister. I don't want to belabour the oval racetrack issue, but I'm just looking at evidence on injuries here. Hock injuries, wrist injuries, foot injuries, hind long bone, fore long bone, hind limbs, muscles. Like, thousands of dogs have been injured on racetracks that are oval. And looking at the evidence that we have, there's been loads of evidence. I joined this committee, I think, when you left the committee and wasn't part of the evidence gathering before. But in the last few years, in working with Mark Ruskell and looking at evidence and listening to what Dogs Trust is saying, what SSPCA is saying, what One Kind is saying, all of this evidence, I think, does point to the fact that the racetracks that are oval cause damage to dogs. So I'm just interested in the issues around the Scottish Government supports this approach to the oval racetracks, which you said in your opening, and how would we then, I suppose it's, we're linking all of this oval racetrack with the evidence that the oval racetracks cause injury. Is that what the evidence that I'm looking at is defining? Is that correct, Minister?
Yeah, it's about the oval shape of the track. There's evidence from the UK and abroad about the injuries and fatalities on those oval tracks. There are a small number of straight tracks in other countries, and there isn't the evidence of the same degree of risk to justify a ban on straight tracks. And that's, if there was a straight track opened up in Scotland, we would keep that under review. But the focus has definitely been on the fact that it's an oval track.
And you keep it under review, so that allows, if a straight racetrack were to open, that would allow the flexibility in this proposed legislation for the government to then alter an approach. Because right now the proposal is just for oval racetracks.
Yes, that would be for the government at the time to make that decision, yeah.
Righty. Okay. Okay, I think that's it.
Thank you. What we look at is the narrowing of the scope in the bill on definition of race and wider animal welfare concerns. So the concerns were raised with the committee as part of this bill, but also in the previous petition about the welfare of greyhounds away from the track, in particular, no specific regulations on kennelling. What is your current position on the need for regulations on kennels and whether there is wider animal welfare issues around the movement of dogs for racing?
Well, we currently have no plans to introduce any specific regulation to other aspects of greyhound racing in Scotland, including keeping, breeding or kennelling, training or the transport of greyhounds. This is specifically about the racing of them, and the other activities that you're talking about. They're already covered in the general provisions of the Animal Health and Welfare Act of 2006 or other legislation that are applying to all dogs.
So the Scottish Animal Welfare Commission's views was that the kennels aren't compatible with a good quality of life. Do you still agree with that, or do you still disagree with that?
Kennels are
not compatible with a good quality of life.
Yeah, I think I've stated previously that I wouldn't entirely agree with that because I know an awful lot of kennel dogs that live very good quality lives.
So it's on that basis that you don't accept the Scottish Animal Welfare Commission's position?
I think I've been clear that I am not entirely convinced that a kennel dog's quality of life is any less than a dog's quality of life that's in a home.
Okay, thank you. So what's the suggestion that if we ban greyhound racing in Scotland, that will not have an impact on GB tracks that are licensed south of the border? Do you believe that the bill has opportunity to improve the lives of those greyhounds that are kennelled in Scotland but racing in England? And if that's the case...
Sorry, could you repeat that, Convener?
So at the moment, the bill will not stop greyhounds being kennelled in Scotland and therefore raced in England.
Yeah.
Is there not a concern that this bill should also cover kennelling so that those dogs that continue to be raced south of the border have a good quality of life?
Well, if that's the scope of the bill that Mr Ruskell is going to bring forward, then that will be entirely up to Mr Ruskell.
Okay, thank you. We're going to move on to questions on enforcement provisions. Question from Ariane Burgess.
Thanks, Convener. Morning, Minister. The bill makes provision for enforcement and deprivation orders and disqualification orders and seizure orders in relation to greyhounds. And the Scottish Government, in the Scottish Government's memorandum on the bill, it sets out that it will also be seeking to make some amendments to these provisions. So I'd be interested to understand from you why you consider these amendments are needed to these provisions.
It's to help to streamline the enforcement and avoid the need to establish new court systems and processes, because we have the 2006 Act currently. So there's a suitable capability within that legislation to allow any enforcement to take place.
Okay, so it's primarily around the streamlining of those processes. And do you have a sense of clarity around who would be responsible for enforcing that legislation? For example, would local authorities have a role?
Well, as the bill is introduced at the moment, it's the responsibility of Police Scotland only. Scottish local authorities could also potentially be added as enforcers subject to their agreement, and I think I'm right in saying that Mr Ruskell is currently talking to COSLA on the potential of that being part of it. So yes, it would broaden the scope for other people to be able to have a role in inspecting these things.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you. Would you like to look at the responsibility for enforcement?
I just asked that question.
You're happy with that? Okay. We're going to move on to questions on implementation, transition and review. And a question from Rhoda Grant.
Yeah, so we have heard that there is little or no racing happening at Thorntons at the moment. But I wonder if the Scottish Government have had any dealings with Thornton to see if there is a need for transitional arrangements, given that there is a business which will be closed down as part of this. There may be staff employed there as well. What transitional arrangements can the Scottish Government put in place?
Well, we're not anticipating a large number of additional greyhounds needing to be rehomed in Scotland as a consequence of the bill.
So, sorry, I'm not talking about the greyhounds. I'm talking about the business at Thorntons and the staff that may be employed there.
Oh, sorry, I misheard what you said. Could you repeat the question?
So I'm just wondering if you've had discussions with Thorntons about transitional arrangements, given
about their site?
About their site and their employees and their business? No,
we haven't. Unless Andrew can tell it, no.
So do you anticipate having any of those discussions to see what support they may need?
I'm not adverse to it. I'm more than happy to have those discussions with the owner of Thorntons Racetrack, yeah. Okay.
And you also said in your opening remarks that Thorntons was very much a social racetrack rather than one maybe that there was a lot of money changing hands. I wonder if you have given any thought to what we all know that older men have difficulty in finding social outlets. The men's sheds are ones, but there's very few. And given that there could be isolation and a lack of social activity for the people who normally go to Thorntons, whether you've had any discussions with them or organisations that might represent them to see what could be put in place to make sure they don't become isolated.
Yeah. Listen, I absolutely take on board the point you made. I think it was one of the things that I talked about before, the social value of what this is, but that cannot get in the road of the issue around the welfare scenarios that we're talking about in the scope of this bill. But no, I haven't spoken to anyone in Thornton about those transition points that you raise. I'm more than happy to have those discussions with them because I absolutely take that on board and I take it very seriously.
Okay, it would be useful if when you do that, that you maybe drop us a line or let us know what the outcome of those discussions are.
I'd be happy to.
Again, it seems a bit strange that the government have backed this bill but not actually looked at the implications on the one track that's there. It wouldn't have taken very much to contact Thorntons and ask what the impact on the business at Thorntons would be, but also the wider impact. Because once again, and I quote from the previous evidence session that you were in front of the committee, you said that you're making a distinction. It would be disproportionate to ban what is a pastime for the vast majority of people who do it in Scotland, as opposed to the professionalism of what's happening down south. But you've supported this without looking at the impacts that you've so clearly touched on the previous time you were in front of the committee.
Yep, I absolutely accept that. That I haven't gone back to. Actually, in my defence, there was a number of occasions where I did actually try to go to the racetrack, but there wasn't any racing happening. Perhaps if I had made more effort to reach out to the owner and actually go and speak to him when there was no racing, I accept that. I'll take that on board, and I will absolutely endeavour to do that now.
Okay, thank you. Emma Harper.
Thanks, Convener. Retired greyhounds make great pets when they're rehomed, and it looks like we have lots of dogs needing rehomed in Scotland, even though racing isn't happening in Scotland. And I'm just looking at some of the data around the dogs and the charities that are then sometimes burdened because the dogs will have injuries that need to be dealt with before they can be rehomed. So is the government doing work with some of the charities in order to look at the amount of animals that do need, I suppose, surgery or surgery or anything before they're rehomed? Is that kind of data that's been gathered?
No,
I'm
it's
looking
not.
at Andrew kind of as well.
No, that's not something. We're not anticipating a huge number of additional issues for dogs, but I do know that GBGB do a lot of work in terms of rehoming dogs that have had specific injuries. There is a rehoming centre in my constituency that I've visited where GBGB actually pay to have the operations done. So GBG do that work themselves, and that would be how I would anticipate that continues.
Okay, thanks.
Just on in the back of Emma's question, do you have any idea of how many greyhounds in Scotland will actually be affected by this bill?
We don't have specific numbers, but we're not anticipating huge numbers of dogs being rehomed as a result of this. But having had a conversation with Mr Ruskell, my understanding is that both the SSPCA and another organisation, which has gone right out of my head at the moment, have accepted that any rehoming that would need to be done, that they will have the capacity to be able to do so.
But even beyond rehoming, this is a piece of legislation that's going through the Parliament. How many greyhounds in Scotland, given your views now are based on animal welfare, how many greyhounds in Scotland will actually be affected by this ban?
By not racing. I don't have specific numbers to say how many dogs are actually racing.
But you're supporting a member's bill and you don't actually know whether it's going to be a significant benefit to greyhounds in Scotland.
What I do know is that the dogs that would be raced on an oval track have an inherent risk of injury. How many dogs that will actually affect, how many dogs are being raced, I don't have a specific number, unless you've got a number in your...
Yeah, well...
Again, Minister, you've made a decision to support this bill, yes, but you don't actually know whether it's the numbers of dogs that it's going to affect are actually proportionate or disproportionate to a piece of legislation.
I've told you what the answer is. I don't have a specific number unless Andrew has got a specific number, but that wasn't the point. It wasn't about numbers of dogs. It was about the inherent risk on racing on an oval track.
And as far as we know, there aren't any dogs racing in Scotland at the moment because the Thornton hasn't operated for several months. So if there are dogs racing that are taken from Scotland to race maybe in the north of England, the bill won't interfere with them carrying on doing that. So
okay.
There's been a natural decline in the numbers of dog racing, as you know, for several years as Thornton has declined because of falling attendances and difficulty arranging the bookmaker to attend. So the activity at Thornton has declined over several years. So as far as we know, there are clearly there aren't any dogs actively racing in Scotland because the only track has been closed most of the year.
Okay, so it's currently the animal welfare of no dogs in Scotland will be improved by this bill?
Unless they start racing.
Okay, thank you. Beatrice Wishart.
Good morning, panel. I guess this question could come under the unintended consequences heading. We had written evidence from GBGB that, and I quote, were a ban on greyhound racing to be introduced, there's a very real risk that the activity would be driven underground. And they stated that that would pose a greater risk to welfare. So what, has the Scottish Government considered that risk and whether any underground activity would be a likely or realistic outcome, consequence of the bill?
Well, it was a thought that I had at my time of asked the question, and currently there is no evidence of underground greyhound racing in Scotland in response to the closure of Shawfield previously. We understand that the intention of this bill is that it will remain legal to take greyhounds to race in England, so therefore if people want to race their dogs they still have that option to do it down south. So therefore at this moment in time we don't have any evidence of the potential for underground racing.
So you don't see it as being a possibility?
Anything's a possibility, but right at this moment in time we don't see it as being an evidence that anything is happening in that space.
Okay.
Emma Roddick.
Thank you, Convener. We know when breed-specific restrictions or regulations or legislation is brought in, there tends to be displacement and different breeds start to become involved in whatever the regulation was looking to prevent. Is there concern that different breeds might be subject to the kind of dangerous racing that we've been discussing that greyhounds are put through, and that same welfare risk would apply to them?
Do you mean like whippet racing as opposed to greyhound racing? Well, it would come down to the same response that if it's racing on an oval track. Again, if we have got, we don't have any specific evidence at the moment, but if you're going to be racing a whippet, it's likely to be less than that very high intensity, commercially driven sport that greyhound racing has done in other parts of the country.
Is the Scottish Government planning to or willing to consider keeping this under review should the bill pass, whether there are other breeds that are now at risk?
I would imagine that any government will constantly keep these things constantly under review, and I'm sure that members like Mr Ruskell will be very quick to highlight if there is if they anticipate a problem coming forward.
Thank you. The government's position has changed from being potentially pro-licence to be pro-ban. Was there not more scope within licensing to have a broader impact on the welfare of greyhounds rather than what this bill will deliver, which, from what you've just told us, is not going to impact any greyhounds? But the government had within its powers to introduce licensing that could have been more encompassing, looked at things like kennelling, looked at dog transport, and had a bigger impact. But your position has changed from licensing to a ban. Again, what evidence has changed since the last evidence session in 2024, which have made you side with this rather than licensing?
Well, licensing is still an opportunity if somebody brings forward a straight track, for instance. It's about the oval track. That was the specific purpose of being able to support the bill. But if somebody does want to open up a straight track, then the licensing of that has got a potential to be taken forward.
Okay, thank you. Any further, Tim?
Yeah, I think just to pick up on that point, actually, because that's what I was just writing some notes on. So yeah, you don't see that there is any potential in licensing for an oval track rather than the outright ban? Because my understanding, because obviously I think this was May 24 when this came to committee, which was prior to my time on committee. But my understanding is when we looked at the petition, there was it basically reported that there was no need for a ban. Initially, your position was there was no need for a ban. So you don't see that there's a potential benefit here of rather than going down this route, we could use licensing for both an oval or any future straight track?
As I said, there's the potential for a licence to be brought in if there is somebody wants to open up a straight track. It was the oval part of the track that Mr Ruskell changed that allowed the government to change its position to supporting the principles of the bill.
But okay, so just to confirm that then, so I suppose it goes back to Finley's, the convener's earlier question, that the change in the government position from 24 to 25 was around just the implementation of it, rather than an outright ban, was just that oval track part.
Yes.
Yep. Despite the fact that the original discussions were all around Thornton Track, which was an oval track at that time.
It wasn't. It was about banning greyhound racing in Scotland across the board.
Okay. Okay. Right.
Rhoda Grant.
A wider question, really. I mean, we have this members' bill in front of us. We're looking at another members' bill on dog theft later on in this meeting. We've had Graham's bill on dog breeding. I just wondered, when is the Scottish Government going to take a holistic approach to welfare of dogs? Do they have any plans to bring forward the legislation and pull it together? It seems that there is something missing, and it's members that are filling those gaps.
I'm not sure that that's the case. I think the government takes a very strong view on animal welfare issues across the board. But if members have specific areas of concern that they want to bring forward, then that's the beauty of our Parliament, that members are free to be able to do so.
It's very fragmented.
That's potentially a fair statement, but at the moment that's the way the current provisions are. And we have members who are very capable of bringing forward bills that are going to be debated by Parliament and then decided on one way or the other.
Tim.
Sorry, I think that's a fair point then. Do you think there is a responsibility on government? Because governments are held to higher account, aren't they? So do you think there's a responsibility on government then when you see multiple members' bills coming forward that are all sort of pooling that same thought, that actually government needs to step in and say, well, hang on a minute then, rather than accepting these and saying that we'll back them, we'll look more holistically at the bigger picture?
Not at this moment in time, no.
Okay, fine.
Thank you. Emma Harper.
Thanks, Convener. So, I mean, consolidation legislation was talked about when I took forward my livestock worrying bill, but my goal at that time was to update the 70-year-old legislation in the UK, because alpacas and llamas were now livestock, and that hadn't existed before when the legislation. So, but consolidation legislation is an option, but it's very, very intensive in terms of resource intensive to pull all the legislation. So there is an option, and I understand, but my understanding is that it's very resource intensive and time intensive. Is that what consolidation legislation would involve?
Well, I can tell you just from experience the level of engagement that you have to have on a specific bill. If you were then to consolidate all of those, then yes. Now, I'm quite sure that Keith will be able to give a more fundamental answer than I am in terms of the work that would involve in terms of resource. But I know from the individual bits of legislation that I take forward, they are incredibly intense. So therefore, I would imagine if you were consolidating all of that, that would be the same. But Keith, if you want to add anything to that.
No, not much. The Animal Health and Welfare Scotland Act 2006, that was intended to be a consolidation of a lot of animal welfare legislation and apply the same rules across the board to the protection of animals. But you know, naturally, there are specific issues, specific welfare issues that come up and which deserve a particular approach. So yes, consolidation work does involve a great deal of policy work and legal work, but particularly with the nature of animal welfare, you know, individual concerns arise on which people feel a particular solution is needed.
There is something in the Maurice Golden's bill that he brought forward about dog theft. That it became very clear for a period of time that there were dogs being stolen because they're of enormous value. That maybe wasn't the case when they were bringing forward the legislation in 2006. So as things evolve and situations arise, then I would presume that will be why members feel compelled to bring things forward.
Okay.
Thank you. Tim Eagle.
Fair question, but just because I think people will be watching this, and because we've mentioned the other bills as well that have gone through, just for absolute clarity, because I'm conscious that in Maurice Golden bills that you just mentioned, I think there's amendments coming forward in there that open the scope of that up to working dogs, etc. as well. We're obviously talking about specifically greyhounds here, but obviously dogs are used in a multitude of different disciplines in Scotland at the moment. So at this present time, the government are not looking at doing anything else with, whether that be sheepdogs or working dogs, retrieval dogs with spilled sports or anything like that. This is purely for you and will be for the stage 2, all about greyhounds and greyhounds in Scotland.
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Just before we move on to the member, Matt Ruskell, I've just got another question. I just wanted to get a feeling for how this bill will go as far as it needs to go to improve animal welfare. Do you have an indication, Minister, of how many dogs, greyhounds, are raced in the GB tract south of the border that are kennelled in Scotland? Any feeling of what numbers we're talking about?
I think there are some numbers on record. As I recall, it's around 20 trainers in Scotland. But I think that's the number
we can write to the committee with a figure, as accurate a figure as we have.
Again, it's quite important because the government have taken a position to support this bill rather than bring forward its own legislation, which doesn't address one of the key issues that's been raised throughout this parliamentary session on the overall welfare of greyhounds in Scotland, whether they're raced in Scotland or not, and that is that the vast majority of greyhounds that are injured in Scotland are being raced in England. So I would have thought you would have known how many greyhounds are kennelled in Scotland to be raced in England.
We will have figures that, as I said, I don't have to hand. We can write to the committee with what those numbers are. Okay. But I would add, this is as much an evidence session for the government as it is for everybody else. Is the committee's position that there should be a ban on allowing dogs to travel south of the border? Is that what the committee? More than happy to hear what the committee's positions are on these things.
Yeah, but the reason we have you in front of us, Minister, is to work out why the government is supporting this bill and what basis you're supporting it.
Yeah.
Because you've made the decision.
Yeah.
And it would be the idea of this session today is for us to understand why you've taken that decision, because you've got the capacity and the resources to look into it in great detail and form an opinion, and you've done that, but it appears that there's gaps of information that's missing, and we're going to have to write to you to get that. So I'm surprised that the government's come to a position and you're not able to provide some of the information that that decision was ultimately made on.
Well, this bill is about Scotland, it's not about England. Thank you.
I'm going to bring in Mark Ruskell.
Thanks very much, Convener. It's been a very interesting session this morning. I've got a couple of questions for you, Minister, and your team. Firstly, I think you alluded earlier to a letter that has been sent to you by the Dogs Trust, Blue Cross, SSPCA, Scottish Greyhound Sanctuary, and they, in that letter, make a commitment to rehome any dogs as a consequence of this bill. I think the figures that are mentioned are between 40 and 60 dogs that may require to be rehomed. Does that give you the confidence that this bill, should it go to stage 3 vote and be passed, could be implemented sooner than later, and certainly within the 12-month implementation date that's on the face of the bill?
Well, the implementation, I think that's one of the discussions that we are due to have going forward. That's one of the discussions that we'll have as to what the implications are and all the evidence that we have. And that letter will be fully analysed and discussed with officials, and we will take that forward from there in discussion with yourself.
That would be your primary concern, is about rehoming the dogs, ensuring that can happen.
It is one of the concerns.
Okay, thanks for that. Can also turn to the issue that's come up from a number of members of this committee this morning, and that's around the issues that are not within this bill. That is the situation that can arise when GBGB trainers are taking dogs to race in tracks in England. Now, the current regulations for that fall under the 2006 Animal Welfare Act, and you mentioned already, Minister, the regulations that relate to the transport of animals for commercial purposes. And you mentioned kennelling as well. Is that an area of wider animal welfare, which relates to greyhounds, but also relates to dogs and other animals as well, which the government is reviewing, has reviewed, is in the process of reviewing? And I'd be interested in the view from Andrew Voas there about what work the government has been doing in this area to review those provisions which do affect greyhounds, particularly around transport, because I know that there's been some concern that some trainers have not been going through the proper regulatory process applying for transport licences. What kind of review is the Scottish Government doing on that, or has done on that recently?
As you know, we consulted fairly recently on potential licensing of various animal-related activities, including dog walking, dog grooming, but kennelling might come into that sort of area as well. Currently, we are taking forward work on looking at licensing canine fertility services, because we think that's the highest priority in terms of potential harm to animals that's happening in Scotland. So that's where we're concentrating our resources at the moment in my welfare team. The issue of transport, as you say, there's legislation based on EU requirements for commercial movement of dogs, and that applies to greyhounds and other commercial movements of dogs. We're not actively reviewing that at the moment, but we will be monitoring any future developments in the EU, for example, or at UK level, looking at reviewing transport legislation affecting dogs. So that's an area that we're keeping an eye on, but we don't have any active plans to amend that in Scotland at the moment.
Okay. I mean, my understanding is that there is a Welsh bill which is broadly very similar to the bill that I'm proposing to this Parliament, which is going through the Senate at the moment. And the Welsh Government have made a commitment, alongside making it an offence to race a greyhound in Wales. They're also looking at some of those wider issues around transport of dogs over the Welsh border. Is that something that you could consider between now and certainly the stage 2, stage 1 debate of this bill, about what kind of commitments the government could do to look at that wider issue, in particular transportation licences that have been raised with me as an issue about enforcement and whether the regulations are working effectively or not?
There are already authorisations that are required for anyone transporting animals. There's Type 1 and Type 2 authorisations, and it will be for the responsibility of those that are transporting greyhounds to ensure that they are compliant with the regulations that are currently in place, and that's our position at the moment.
Okay. Can I also turn to yourself, Keith, as well? So, if this bill was to ban somebody from racing a dog in England, given that they live in Scotland, would that be legal? Would that be proportionate? Is it difficult to ban somebody from doing something in another jurisdiction, even though they're resident in Scotland?
I haven't considered it. And because that's not the intention of the bill at the moment, that's not the basis on which the government has been supporting the bill.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. And I think the final question I have is really about the issue of other forms of track which don't exist in the UK. Straight tracks don't exist. Other forms of tracks don't exist in the UK at the moment. There is a provision in the bill, Minister, for future ministers to consider the definition of a track should evidence emerge of other forms of greyhound racing and the risk of harm that could arise as a result of that, to change that definition. Is that something that you welcome? I mean, there's been discussion today about straight tracks, as I say, which do not exist. There is not an evidence base there. But do you welcome the provision in the bill to keep that issue of definition under review through secondary legislation?
Well, the definition of the track is in the bill, and we're supporting the bill at this stage.
But the wider provision for ministers to review that if evidence came forward, if some form of underground racing, which nobody's invented yet, came forward, then ministers would be able to review that going forward. Right. Okay, I think that's probably me, convener, just now.
Thank you very much, Mr Ruskell. That brings us to the end of this session, so thank you, Minister, and your officials for attending this morning. I'm now going to suspend the meeting until 10:45, but given that we're running ahead of time, I then propose that we move into private session for 15 minutes up to 11 o'clock before we move on to the agenda item on the Dog Theft Scotland Bill at stage 2. So suspend this meeting until 10:45. Thank you.